Hi, I'm Josh Foley and I'm an artist living in Launceston. I'm here today in my studio to talk to you about a cool street art project called Electric Botany. Margaret Stones is recognised as one of Australia's preeminent botany illustrators of the 20th century. Stones sketched specimens, often using watercolour and pencil, and her works are held in public and private collections around the world. The core of this project was to get local creatives to reflect on the work of Margaret Stones, which is held at the Queen Victoria Museum and Art Gallery, and translate their interpretations onto traffic control boxes around the city. The colourful boxes have added a vibrant trail of street art around our city, and now more works are being added to the trail, and this is where you come in. I'm here to give you some ideas on how you might interpret Margaret Stones' work. One of the creatives asked to participate in this project. My first step was in getting some works by Margaret that really inspired me. When I received these works, I then studied them and examined some of the shapes and some of the colours, and I selected some that I really responded to. After this, I drew these diagrams where I've indicated particular shapes and colours that I thought I could use in my work. Then I abstracted them somewhat, and then using these abstracted diagrams, I then approached painting my box. These are the tools that we've selected for you to create your own works. These works will be photographed and collaged together and then wrapped on the boxes. We have watercolour paper, watercolour pencils, and a selection of brushes. And most importantly, you'll need a jar with some water. So one approach with using the pencils, if you wanted to create a kind of very sort of spacious and like a wash of colour over the paper, you could use the side of your pencil and work across the paper in such a fashion like that. You might want to get another colour and just place this other colour beside the first one. Then grabbing maybe a brush that had a bit more bristle to it, a bit wider. Dip it in your brush, get plenty of water on there, and then just work it into the paper. You can really dig the bristles in, and then more water. And you want to kind of work fairly rapidly because the paint will seize up fairly quickly, and then it'll be secured on the paper and you won't be able to move it around. So if you don't want your works to get muddied, it's a good idea to maybe even have a separate jar with some clean water and just be sort of continually cleaning your brush, and have some paper or some rag next to you that you can wipe your brush on. So now that I've done that, I might work into this colour and then work that colour towards the first colour, and as you can see, you can kind of make them bleed into each other a bit and create a sort of wash kind of area. So another approach with the pencils would be to describe some forms more distinctly by creating some dark areas around the form, and in some ways working with watercolour pencil, you're working in a two-step process. You're laying down the pigment onto the paper in spaces and scenarios whereby you will then be blending and working into that. In saying that, there's no issue in having some areas of your work not worked into with the water, you can just use them like coloured pencils, and that can be a really effective way to create contrast. But for the purposes of this particular demonstration, here I've created some bold line work with the intention of using that to create a form. And I'm keeping that fairly abstract again. And then just the more water you add in the section, the more it will bleed and fade out. And you're just using the white of the paper here to create the highlight of this form. I take this as an opportunity to examine maybe a little bit about how botanical illustrators and Margaret Stones in particular may have approached her illustrations. Often there would be an initial pencil drawing of the specimen, and then using either watercolor paints and brushes or watercolor pencils like what you're using today, they would then create some form and some shading and some shadow to really bring out what that particular specimen looked like. This is some kind of alien flower specimen out of my imagination. This is a botanical illustration from my imagination. And when you're working on your pieces as well, feel free to use Margaret's work really as just a starting point for your own expressions. The good thing about Margaret's work, and I suppose the subject that she was using, was that flowers and organic objects often do lend themselves to then being expanded upon, and so in that way you can very much let your imagination kind of run wild. But so here what's happening is the initial pencil drawing is being used as a kind of blueprint to then create the colour movement upon. So one approach with the watercolour that can be really effective, because often you're using the white of the paper for your highlight, sometimes you might want to create a wash kind of effect, and you want to sort of control where that wash effect is bleeding into the paper and where the white is remaining. So an effective method for enabling you to control that is to create a little stencil. And I'll just create a very basic stencil here, just with another piece of paper, just random shape. But what you might like to do is use one of Margaret's works and take out a few shapes that you like, draw it on a piece of paper and then cut that out. Then by just placing it over your piece of paper there, and either holding it down, or you could put a little bit of masking tape there, or just however you wanted to do it, just working over the top of it. Okay, so I'm just going to work on that side first. Okay. By holding this down, and you want to be working maybe from your stencil across onto the page rather than the other way, if you can help it, because you want to try and create, you want that line of the stencil to be as exact as you can. But in saying that, you may want to make it bleed a little bit. So again, there's room for creative experimentation there. So just again, dip in the water. And working across and away from the stencil, sort of pressing down on that edge. Okay, so what I might do is just holding that down, grabbing another colour, maybe one I haven't used yet, the green, and just you're really just putting the pigment down on the paper where, you know, vaguely you want it to be directed towards, because pressing into the paper with your brush, I didn't clean that probably enough, and so that's an example of if you don't really get that other colour out of your brush, it's gonna end up being a bit muddy. But anyway, and that green's probably not as strong as it could have been, so that's also an example of maybe I just needed to put a bit more pigment down on the paper. And so in the creative kits, there should be probably a couple of pieces of paper for everyone. So you might want to use one for experimentation and playing around with some effects, and then the other one for your final piece. So I've just put more pigment down on that section, and that's a lot stronger now. Okay, so now that we have that, we'll just lift that up. And it's not, you know, it's bled in there a little bit, and it's not super exact there, and you know, there's obviously been a bit of bleed, you know, but you've still got this nice shape in here, and sometimes those organic shapes there can be quite effective and fun to play around with. Thanks for your time and watching, and I can't wait to see your works around the city.
Standing